I remember playing Max Payne. My mom was sleeping in a separate room. Like I'd sneak into the room when she was trying to sleep and I'd put the headphones on and I'd be like, shoot dodging through the air. Like,
the most intense gameplay
exactly. And the
while
screen
mother
was
is sleeping.
flashing and she'd wake up going, Kyle, what the f*** are you doing? And I completed that game while my mom was sleeping, basically. And I remember interviewing at Remedy and Sam came in and I was like, almost like that's Sam, the guy who plays Max Payne. Exactly. Everyone had that. Like, so he was a big hero of mine at the time as well. They were like, oh, so we're thinking about doing Alan Wake 2. And I was like, I'm in, let's go.
Fans of survival horror games rejoiced when Alan Wake 2 was released. The long-awaited sequel became one of the fastest-selling games produced by Remedy, the Finnish studio famously known for titles like Max Payne, Quantum Break, and Control. When people think Remedy, they think Sam Lake, the studio's creative director and industry legend. Lesser known, however, is Kyle Rowley, Alan Wake 2's other game director, who can be seen lifting the game's many awards alongside Sam. I wanted to learn more about Kyle beyond just Alan Wake. How does one go from a fan of Max Payne to working on titles like RuneScape and Cyberpunk? And how does one sustain a 20-year career in game dev, an industry notorious for its ups and downs? This is Win Conditions.
Obviously, you just had recently shipped Alan Wake 2, and you've been actually in the games industry for the better part of like 2+ decades.
Yeah, God, don't say it. It's scary when you say it like
Which is
that.
crazy.
Yeah.
You know, insane track record, though. If I like look at everything you've had your fingerprints on, it's like such a crazy breadth of projects.
Yeah.
But I want to ask about you and like your upbringing and kind of how your environment, like where you grew up, what environment you grew up in, and how you formed your earliest relationship with games in the first place.
The first console I got was the Mega Drive.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that was like I can't remember how old I was, like pretty young, 7 or 8 or something. But I used to play that quite religiously, and my dad used to play Krusty the Clown's Playhouse or some game like that. So we used to play those games together. But I really wanted a Mega CD for my birthday. They bought me a Mega CD, but they also bought a PlayStation, and I didn't know what a PlayStation was. So like I opened the Mega CD and I was like, oh, this is amazing. Went and plugged it in or whatever. My brother opened on my birthday, went and opened the PlayStation, and he was like younger than me, and he was like, oh, this is cool. Started to plug it in. I was just playing like, I can't remember, what's the helicopter? There was a helicopter game. It's like, I can't remember what it was on the Mega Drive. So I was playing that. And then I heard this other thing going on in the background. I was like, what the hell is he playing? So I walked in there and he was playing Tekken in 3D on the PlayStation. So I was like, what the hell is this? Like, get off it, get away. So then I started playing like, that was it. Me and my brother then, we were just like together playing like Tekken Tag and all those kind of games.
Yep.
Like, and my uncle was he was a programmer, and he was kind of the first kind of person who I'd spoke to who kind of knew a little bit about making games, but I was so young. I remember like really wanting to make games at some point, and yeah, but there was not a lot of information around making games when I was like that age. So
wow, even that early on, you had this like, I want to make games as just like going from a player. You're like, it'd be fun to make a game.
Yeah, like as a kid, and you know, there wasn't really any stuff about it. So I used to be into Lego and like trying to do like make my own games through Lego and those kind of avenues. And I kind of forgot about, you know, games development as a career until I got a bit into high school and deciding what I wanted to do for college, actually. I had 2 choices, basically. It was like making games, or I really wanted to be a designer, or like making movies. So like going to film studies. So I actually studied for film, but in the background, I was doing, a few different things, doing mods for like Half-Life 2 and Source Engine. And then also I was running websites with my friend. So I had like these 3 tracks, like web development, making movies, or like trying to do games. And I had these kind of 3 areas that I was kind of doing them all at the same time.
In your teens?
No, yeah, this was like when I was between like 15 and 18. Like, yeah.
It's pretty damn good.
Yeah, and I sold that website as well. And it's a funny story because like that running that website and selling it allowed me to get a job later on in games, doing other stuff. After college, when I was doing film school, I had a choice to make, go to do university film school, or go to the first games course they'd ever started running in England was at Staffordshire University when I was in the first year. I think it was like 2004 or 2005. So I was like, had a choice, and I was like, Mom, I think I'm going to go study games. And she knew I liked games because she saw us playing games, and they were just like, okay, well, if that's what makes you happy, then go and do it. So yeah, they were just like totally supportive and didn't really like, there was no like drive from them to be like an accountant or a lawyer or a doctor or anything like that. They were just like, do whatever makes you happy, basically. I studied that course in games for 1 year only because it was the first year they'd ever run the course, and they were teaching things about Unreal Engine, and like how to use Unreal and 3D modeling. But I'd kind of already done all that stuff just like when I was doing modding and stuff like that. So I felt like I wasn't really getting anything out of the course. So I kind of just quit at the end of after the first year.
The first year of the first year they had the games program.
Yeah, exactly. And I quit. And then my parents, like at that point, they were like, okay, so now what are you going to do? And I was like, I'm going to figure out, don't worry. And I went back to kind of doing some website stuff with my friend, working in warehouse factories. Like I did some rubbish jobs. I've done all sorts of jobs growing through my education. Like my first job was actually like a dishwasher at a Greek restaurant. I was a glass collector in a nightclub. And I was like illegally working there. I wasn't old enough to work in a nightclub. I think I was like 14 or 15. And then I worked in like a supermarket in a frozen section, which is like the worst section to work at in a supermarket because it's goddamn freezing cold.
You're so cold
they
all
have all the cold.
I don't even like grabbing ice cream from the ice cream section, and it's ice cream.
Yeah, and I'm stacking the frozen shelves, and I'm in the freezer, and I was like, this is awful. And then, so then I went to college, university, came back, and I didn't have a job, so I did some more warehouse work. And in the meantime, I was still doing modding stuff. So I just applied to work at a bunch of game dev studios in QA, basically. And my first job in the industry when I was like 19 was actually at Lionhead working on Black and White 2. I was in the QA department, but I wasn't actually like a QA tester. I was like the guy, because like devs would write bugs and they were like really badly written. Like they would not be very descriptive. The English wasn't great. So they basically hired me to kind of write the bugs in like, so that I'd kick the bugs.
Write it better?
Yeah, write the bugs better so that people could understand what the hell was going on in these bugs. I came in right at the end of Black and White 2, so like 3 or 4 months. It wasn't that long. And then when I knew that that contract wasn't being renewed, I kind of started applying for other jobs and ended up applying to EA Chertsey because they're kind of in Guildford area. My drive to work when I was working at EA Chertsey, it was about 3.5, 4 hours there and 3.5, 4 hours back. And I was doing 8, 9, 10 hour shifts. So like, basically I did that for like quite a long time and I was spending, my fuel costs were higher than my salary. So I was getting no money either. So
I've been there and that's like cutting your teeth because you want to get in but you got to do the 3-hour drive if you want to get the experience. Well, it's kind of funny. You did some of the dirty work, literally dishwashers, freezer aisle, warehouse job. And then you went to like digital dirty work of kind of cleaning up people's QA and bug reports.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Did you learn like something in that process? Was that just like purely just looking at, the dirtiest part of the process of game development? Was there any like actual lessons there? Or was that just kind of like,
Well, I made friends there, like Ted Timmons, who was part of the QA team. He wasn't actually on Black and White 2. He was working on Fable at the time. He's a Chelsea fan like I am, so we kind of had some stuff in common. And like he's now like the senior creative director of Raven Software, I think, on Call of Duty. Yeah, and then there was like the lead man. My lead QA guy was like Jamie Burry. He was, when I went to work on Cyberpunk, he was an animator there. So and then there's a bunch of people there who like ended up going across the industry, and as it is in games, you kind of run into them in like different aspects of your career, like later on. So all of the team there were really talented. Yeah, and like Andy Robson, who was like the QA manager at Lionhead, kind of owe him my career in a way because like he took a risk because I was just a guy who was just I remember when I applied for that job, it was like 3 a.m. or something, like in the morning, and I was applying, and then I was like stayed up the whole night. I was playing Anarchy Online or some game, I can't remember what it was. And then it was like 3 a.m. I applied, and then I got a phone call at like 8 a.m. and I hadn't slept. And I was like, I think I was on the toilet as well at the time. And he's like, hey, did you apply for this thing today? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, cool, yeah, we really need someone to come and help us write these bugs. Can you come down like tomorrow? And I was like, yeah. So then that was kind of like how I started there. It was really weird. I
completely just took a chance at like for no ungodly hour, just like response.
Yeah, exactly. And I can't remember if I actually applied a specific job or I just sent an open application. I can't even remember what it was at the time.
Did you know the kind, like, did you go into it having kind of a North Star, like, okay, well, I'll work at Lionhead, I'll work at EA, I like work in some of these places, and eventually this is like the goal. This is like the kind of game or the kind of studio I'd want to work on, and everything else was a journey there? Or was it just like, I just want to get in, I don't really know where it's going?
I really wanted to be a designer. Didn't really care where at this point. And when I was like doing QA work, both at Lionhead and EA and Codemasters, I was always like working on these mods things and applying to other studios and junior design roles. But I never got any like traction at all. Like I was applying to like all of them, like all the studios that were available at the time. Didn't get any reply on anything. So I was just like, well, I'll keep trying and work my way up inside like QA or whatever. Yeah, applied to Codemasters, managed to get like a QA role there. So I kind of left EA and went to Codemasters because it was like better for my commute times basically. And I was QA on Toka Race Driver. And that was the first time, because I was young. So I was like, and I always see this in new designers now, they're kind of very like ambitious and they want to get their ideas out there. And I was exactly the same. Didn't really care who I was telling them to. I was like, just listen
Nothing
to my
to
ideas.
lose.
Exactly. I'll just send them out. So we were working on Tucker Race Driver, and it had an adaptive AI system. So like the better you were doing or the worse you were doing, the kind of speed of the cars changed, and it would kind of like rubber band the cars to try and like allow you to adapt its difficulty based on how you're playing. But I remember, I can't remember exactly how the system worked, but I figured out when I was playing it how it worked. And I was like, there's a better way to do this. So I put in a bug report, because they had like design suggestion bug reports that you could add as a QA tester. So I spent half my time just filling out those rather than actually finding bugs. But anyway, so I sent a big one for that game. And then the next thing I know, my lead at the time came over and was like, yeah, the team want to book a meeting with you to talk about some bug you put in or something. And I was like, oh, cool. What's that about? And he's like, I don't know. Just go to the other studio. They want to talk to you. And I walked into the meeting room.
What was going through your mind? You're like,
I was like, shit, cool. Well, this is good. So maybe I can get a design job working on the next talk, whatever. I was like, yeah, cool. Let's talk about it. So we talked it through. And then I remember the EP asking the AI programmer, like, can we implement this then? And he was like, no, it's too late now. And I was like, damn. But I was like, still, that was really cool, because it gave me confidence that like, even though they didn't end up utilizing my suggestions, that like, oh, maybe I could do this as a job. Like I remember when I came back and everyone was like, all the QA guys were like, oh, how did that go? Like, oh, are you going to be working over there now? Are you, Kyle? Blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh, I hope so. And back then, like QA testers were on contracts, and so there was no stability in terms of like, I wasn't know how, like, if I was going to get my contract renewed. There was always this like time period where everyone's contract was getting renewed, and they'd be like, oh, I wonder if we're all going to stay or whatever. I wanted to get out of that situation. And one of the only ways to do that was like to transition over to dev or to like an actual like marketing or publishing role. So I ended up utilizing the experience I had building those websites with my friends to then transition into a like community role, like marketing role, like it was like online marketing community role inside their Codemasters online division at the time.
Oh, wow.
Which was they're working like MMO games. So we were working on like RF Online, Lord of the Rings Online, Dungeons and Dragons Online. We were like the European publisher for those games.
So it tells me a little bit of something where the beginning days of your teens developing websites actually oddly ended up paying off in a time where in order to stand out, you needed to recognize your kind of like your side project that turned into something that added to your main, your main quest.
Exactly. It was really weird. Like all this mod work I've been doing hadn't paid off at all in getting me a job. But then like all this like side hustle website stuff I was doing with my mate, like ended up getting me this kind of job working in the marketing team. And I learned a lot working in the marketing team. I had to write design specifications for the website that we were building. So like I'd write a whole design document out and then work with the web team to kind of develop the website. So that kind of got me into that like relationship with like asking for something from someone and then going away, looking at your spec and then discussing like how you can kind of build it, which was like, it's like not game design, but it's kind of like it's a design process that it follows similar principles.
Structured ideas put into place for others to kind of execute and fill in blanks.
Yeah, so that was a really kind of valuable time for me. But in my back of my mind still, I was always like, I really want to do game design.
Yeah, because up to that point, nothing that you've really done was like design. It was like QA, it was marketing, kind of creative marketing, some web development.
When I was working at Codemasters, I was still working on like mod stuff for from people that I was working with from my university days who like I just stayed in touch with. We were just working on some stuff behind the scenes. And I ended up applying at Frontier Developments as a level designer, I think the role was that I applied for.
And did you feel like you were qualified for level designer at that point?
I did not at all. Well, other than my mod work, I don't know, like, but not really. So I applied for this level designer role and I kind of forgot about it. And I got a phone call from a recruiter from Frontier going like, hey, we want to have an interview about this kind of level design job. And I was like, what job? I can't remember applying for this job. It must have been ages ago. But they were like, yeah, cool. We want you to come in for an interview. And I was like, okay. And they were working on a game called The Outsider, which is like an open world espionage thriller. So they interviewed me. We talked a lot about like stuff I've been doing in QA and marketing and like these kind of things, like how I've been writing specs for websites, but also just like mod work I've been doing. And I was like, cool. Well, I had the interview. I think before it went well, fine. But yeah, they ended up offered me a role and I'd never done it before in my life. And the reason I think they offered it with me was because we were going to try and work on a multiplayer aspect for this Outsider game. And they didn't have anyone working on the multiplayer. So they were like, well, you've done multiplayer kind of stuff working on these MMO games. You kind of understand like how players kind of engage with those
You're
games.
like, right.
Yeah, exactly. So they were like, you could kind of like do that. I was like, yeah, of course I can do that. Not knowing at all. I didn't know anything really about anything. And so I just kind of took it and then just like I feel like a lot of these things, you just have to take the chance, right? If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. So I kind of took the chance, was just like, well, I'll just figure it out on the go. But the reason I did this was because my dad, he was an accountant, and he was looking to get a new job at the time. And I think one of the systems that this new company that he was going to work for, he knew that they used this other system. And when he kind of interviewed there, he said, yeah, I know that system. Of course, I can work that stuff. He'd never touched it before in his life. And I remember going to a bookstore, and he was buying a book. And I was like, what's that book about? He's like, I've got to read this whole book in like 2 days because I've got to work on this stuff like the next time I go to my job.
Like father, like son.
Yeah, exactly.
You're like, well, if dad's doing it, then I'm going to direct games.
Yeah, exactly. So I kind of like, I was just like, well, whatever. I'll just say I can do it, and then I'll just do it, see how it goes. I think like giving yourself an aura that breeds confidence that you can do something. I think that's also for me a bit of a personality trait thing more than anything else. Like, I'm not saying that, hey, go and lie about what you can do and to try and get a job, but like, it's more just like having confidence that you'll be able to do it. Like, anyway, I think that was kind of like, and that's just something that I've had since I've started my career even to now. So,
and how did that go? How did like Frontier and
I mean, I really liked working at Frontier. Like the game project that we were working on, The Outsider, it was really ambitious. It was like open world with like full stealth mechanics, full like third person shooting. The game was very ambitious, and we were like, I was working on it for almost 4 years, and then it got cancelled. So I was like, that was like the first game I'd ever been a developer on, and that was the first time I realized like, oh crap, like there's no guarantee that anything you work on is actually going to ship.
That must be like a hard reality to face for the first time.
I didn't really have time to process like that game getting cancelled and what that meant, because like it was almost immediately like a switch. Like we went from that, the next day I was working on
a Connect game.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, kind of need to switch my mindset about what kind of game we're making and like how does this work. And also like there was not many games being developed for Connect at the time, so it wasn't anything, you couldn't even play anything because Connect was not really announced. I don't think there was any games out or anything. One of the principles that I learned quite from that project was from an EP that we had with James Dixon. He's still at Frontier now. And he used to constantly say to me, because I was like a senior designer at that time, and he was like, remember the phrase KISS, like keep it simple, stupid. And then whenever I'd do a design, he'd be like, KISS. And I'd be like, it is simple.
Kiss me.
Yeah, exactly. It is simple. He's like, no, it's not simple enough. Like simplify it. It needs to be simple. So like a lot of those like design like intuitions I got in my career came from working on those two projects.
Yeah.
Because they kind of formed me as a designer, not just like design knowledge, but how you talk to people and like how you interact with other designers to make them feel like, oh, you know, I understand your design and your idea, and like maybe it's not exactly how we should do it, but like phrasing and way and like just how you kind of come across as a person that kind of makes those people, even if you didn't like their design or you think it could be improved, but they don't feel bad about it. Like, and like, so
it's one of the hardest things I think in a creative space is to give constructive feedback, be delivered like in a way that doesn't hurt egos, but ultimately also gets the job done in a way that matches a vision.
Yeah, exactly. And so I learned, because my first designs were rubbish, I'm sure, like when I was working there, but I never felt like, oh, I'm bad at this job. Like they were just like, hey, yeah, maybe this isn't quite right, but these elements were good. Maybe we could shift and focus on those things.
Do these things like KISS and whatnot still go? Do they go in your head now?
Yeah, like they're like that KISS thing is like constantly in my head, and I say it to other people now as well. Like I'm passing down the knowledge of like KISS.
Been at Lionhead, you've been at Codemasters, and then kind of like jumping to Frontier. Like I guess before the biggest jump, I'd say after Frontier, it's like, did you absorb any other principles in that path before like I think the next step?
A lot of the things I did, like even when I was doing that website project, like at Codemasters, like I based it heavily on the World of Warcraft website. So like imitation, I don't find imitation inherently bad. Like if it's something you're imitating is actually good. And I don't have any problem. Like one of the things which I talk about with some of the designers that we have, like when we're thinking about like what features do we actually want to innovate on in this game, where do we want to push the boundaries from what we want to do? Like I often say like because soft design was about, I want to innovate on everything. Like, like how you pull out a gun, we need an innovation. Like how you reload the gun, like whatever. I'm like, you can pick like 2 features that we can like try and innovate on. The rest, we're just going to base it on stuff that is kind of proven. Like, and that's totally fine for me. Like, I don't think if you try and innovate on everything, you're going to innovate on nothing.
Well, on that note, tell me about this next big step then from Frontier, then moving on.
I was like, I don't want to work on this. I want to work on something that's like, I would play. I wanted to, like, I was a player, as a gamer would want to play. So then I started looking at studios that were working on either shooters or like, something that was kind of slightly more, or role-playing games or whatever. And that's how I ended up going to Crytek, basically, which was my next role. And they were working on Homefront, The Revolution. So yeah, so that was kind of like, I liked the appeal of that because even though that I wasn't a massive fan of the first Homefront, I thought it was a pretty okay game, like interesting concept. It was more that like I really liked the idea of working on CryEngine because I knew that it was quite powerful and it was kind of like one of the better engines that you could use.
Now, was that jump to Crytek was the Crytek like a leap, or was that kind of like an easy move for you that seemed that if you just applied, you would get something?
After doing, I think it was almost 5 years at Frontier, I was there. So I kind of had experience at that point. And as soon as you have some experience, it at least gets you like in for an interview, like on these roles. Obviously, if you're kind of like applying for roles that are too high above what your experience is, then it's not so easy. But I was applying for one less than what I was actually doing. So yeah. It was kind of like, I felt like I had a chance there. So yeah.
Well, so the next jump is funny because you said you wanted to go to Crytek to experience working on a kind of shooter or something that you liked. And then the next jump was to Jagex?
Yes.
Which was completely not a shooter.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was mainly because
a very different game.
Yeah. I was having, like, both me and Jordan, we joined at the same time at Crytek, and there was problems going on at the time with Crytek as the main studio and their relationship with THQ and the deal that was being done. So there was just like a bunch of financial turmoil, and we knew it was going on. So I was like, this doesn't seem like a very stable place. So that's kind of when I started looking for other roles, and I just really wanted to find some. I was like, well, RuneScape makes loads of money. That's going to be stable. And I've never worked on an MMO. I've never worked actually on a game like that outside of doing the marketing stuff. So I was like, well, I'll just see how that goes. So yeah, then I went to work at Jagex on RuneScape, and honestly, like, I had to do an interview for that, and I had to do a test, and they kind of made me play the opening of the game, the tutorial, and kind of like give feedback on it. And I wrote a lot of feedback. Like, I remember writing pages of it. And I feel like all of its design choices are like the choices I would definitely not make in a game.
It's
like in a modern game.
Insanely idiosyncratic. There's a bunch of systems that you're like, it needs a while to marinate before you can really get it. So from an outsider coming in, it's like,
it's just like, it's not, like if you're going to design a new game, you wouldn't design it like that, I don't think. Like, just there's a bunch of choices there related to like, just like, I understand the concept of like, and it's an AFK game where like you can kind of do it while you're doing other things. But like I just find, anyway, as a designer who'd been doing other design work, I came in, I was like scratching my head a bit about like, I'm not sure how, like I wrote a bunch of feedback. I did the interview, it went well, I got hired, and they started putting me on like content for it. And I was like designing stuff. And then the lead design director would come back and be like, no, that's not how we do it at RuneScape. And I was like, cool. I don't get how to get into the mindset of designing for this game. Like, I found that really hard. Like, because I would make something that I felt would be a good design, but then for most RuneScape players, it was like, no, that's bad. That's exactly the anti of how we would like it to be on RuneScape, because they just it has a very set design philosophy that those players really, really enjoy. And it's not really the same as what you were getting in modern MMOs at the time.
What a spread of like just, and also the entire time in the UK as well.
Yeah, this was all in the
pretty
UK.
remarkable. It's like as just kind of like starting in games and getting into like what at that point 5 different studios.
Yeah,
pretty remarkable.
Yeah, there were some studios who I really wanted to work at. Like Rocksteady was one I really wanted to work at some point. Remedy was one of the next studios, so I applied for Remedy, not thinking really about the consequences of what that would mean if I actually had to go there. I had a girlfriend at the time, and I was just like, oh, I've applied for some studio in Finland. She's like, where the hell is Finland, and what are you talking about? I was like, don't worry about it. Probably won't get the job anyway. And then I ended up getting like an actual interview in Finland. And I was like, so about Finland to her. And she was like, okay. And I was like, Remedy invited us both over. So we flew over to Helsinki.
That's nice.
Yeah, it was really nice. Yeah, went over to Helsinki for a few days. Went to the studio, met everybody. And my girlfriend at the time came with me, and like she kind of like, oh, this is kind of, because Helsinki at the time was kind of like, it still has a subculture of like melon rock and stuff like that, and like that was kind of like our kind of subculture back in England. So it was kind of, I just took her to a bunch of rock bars and was like, this is what we do all the time, and she's like, oh, sounds great. So it was fine. It was fun, and obviously when I went to Remedy, like I was a big Max Payne fan. Like when I was growing up, like I remember playing Max Payne in my mom was sleeping in a separate room, and that's where the PC was. I don't know why we put it there, but and she was working night shifts. So I remember like I'd sneak into the room and she was trying to sleep, and I'd put the headphones on and I'd be like dodging through the air, like
the most intense gameplay
exactly,
while
and the
mother is sleeping.
And she'd wake up going, Kyle, what the fuck are you doing? Get that game off right now. But anyway, and I completed that game while my mom was sleeping, basically. So I had a big connection to Max Payne, and I remember interviewing at Remedy, and Sam came in, and I was like almost like that's Sam, the guy who plays Max Payne. Exactly. Everyone had that, like, so he was a big hero of mine at the time as well. And there was another guy who also applied. He's one of my good friends at Remedy now, Tommy Hudson. And he, when I was working at Jagex, I told them that I was going to work at Remedy. And Dave Solari, hilariously, the guy who was at Codemasters and was the kind of head of the studio, he was working at Jagex at the time in a different role. So we were talking, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to Remedy. He's like, oh, they're taking everybody. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, we were kind of in the process of hiring this other designer, but he ended up deciding to go to Remedy as well. And it was like Thomas Hudson, who was like this guy. So I joined with Tommy on the same day at Remedy together. And when I was talking about like, oh, who are you, blah, 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 I found out that he was a designer on Black, which I was working on when I was at EA Chertsey. Like I was testing Black and he was designer on Black. So we kind of had this kind of weird, like, industry's really small, man.
Well, I want to say, like, how's that move though to like Helsinki? Because that was like the first time you were like working out of the UK then.
Yeah.
That's like a big kind of cultural change too.
Remedy were great. They paid for like relocation and like, you know, flights, and like when you move to Remedy, they put you up in like an apartment until you can find your own one. They also kind of do have cool things where they kind of like will help you find an apartment, and they give you relocation agents. So like all
incredible.
All of that process was like very easy coming over. And like when we first landed on the first day, like we got dropped off at the apartment and they picked us up in a bus, and because like Remedy has this like, it's called Finlandization, and it's basically for expats, and they take you on like Finnish excursions across Finland and do like random Finnish things.
Tell me about your favorite Finnish thing.
We like landed in Helsinki, got on a bus, went off into the forests, had like full Finnish like naked saunas with like jumping in lakes and like drinking until you're getting like passed out. Like it was just like crazy, and I was like, holy crap, what the hell have I joined here? Like this is super weird.
We're making video games, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So that was like a really, really good first impression, I guess, of Finland.
So from a project perspective, that jump, and you worked on Quantum
Break, yeah,
which was compared to like a live service, RuneScape, and maybe some of the other projects you work on, like that was a quantum leap, maybe as far as budget and expectations go. Was that like an easy role to step into?
I kind of like had never worked in a studio where there had been like too much publisher pressure, or like really like where you felt the publisher was like, because when I was working at Frontier on The Outsider, didn't really feel any. I knew we were delivering stuff to the publisher, but it didn't really feel like there was much
that pressure.
Yeah, or kind of like the communication wasn't like, there's communication happening, but it was kind of like on the level above, like between like the EP and those kind of guys. So yeah, like it was like, but there, Quantum Break, the pressure was kind of bigger because it was kind of one of Microsoft's kind of like investments into a big new IP, and you know, that kind of did that big announcement. So yeah, it was a different kind of. At the same time, it's exciting for me. Like I feel like I can get kind of bored, or not bored. I kind of get like, I kind of need the pressure to kind of feel like I'm, you know, doing something meaningful.
You almost have to like move into a space that has the yardstick has moved a little bit, so you need to fill in the space to learn. That's kind of what I'm picking up. It's like you need to continuously challenge yourself in order to use that as a force function.
Exactly. And during the development of Quantum Break, the lead designer ended up leaving. I took over that kind of lead design role for the last like year and a half of Quantum Break's development. So that was kind of like my first ever leadership role. And I didn't really know what that meant, really. Like, I was just like, cool, yeah, I'll do it, whatever. That was kind of a learning experience, and kind of coming back to the stuff that I was talking about working at Frontier. with like those leads there, like Lawrence and Will and Sandy, like those guys were like instrumental in kind of like understanding, I feel like, the best ways to be a lead, like we talked about how you communicate feedback and kind of how you kind of encourage designers to kind of work.
Did Remedy have any company philosophies that, you had KISS from before, and now as you moved to, like, were there any, like, whether Remedy-based or Helsinki ways of approaching, like, game design?
I think the biggest thing was like how important narrative is. Like, it was not something I thought about too much working on these other games, like, but a Remedy narrative is like one of the key like cornerstones of like how we make games. So like every decision, like every design that you had to do was like you had to kind of filter it through, does this make sense in this world? Does it make sense in the narrative? Like, what does it mean for the character? Like, those are the kind of questions you're asking yourself when you're kind of coming up with concepts. And often we would come up with very good, like fundamentally good gameplay ideas, but then you're trying to explain the context and narrative behind them, and the narrative team are going like, I don't think we can kind of make that work. So before they even get to that point, nowadays we're much better at filtering out ideas, even if they may be good on paper from a gameplay and may feel good, they just don't work in the context of the world, so we just don't do them.
So tricky, yeah, balancing the two when you might have a ingenious gameplay mechanism that just like sets the narrative off in a
and we will keep those ideas around for later in case like other projects have them, or like often sometimes we'd be like, oh, the other thing that we were thinking about, maybe we could use it in DLC or something, because like there's less narrative constraints there. So,
well, tell me about CD Projekt Red. Like, what it sounds like you had the Helsinki, Finland kind of like experience, and then going through like a few years, like 3 or 4 years at Remedy, and then making another jump.
Yeah, I think that after Quantum Break, I was working on the Crossfire franchise with Smartgate, and basically acting as a game director on that one. But again, like I just done this like linear game, and Witcher 3 had just come out just before we shipped Quantum Break, and I was like, this game's great. Like,
changed, again, another step change in what games can do.
So I was like, and I really like some of my favorite games of all time, if I list them, a lot of them are role-playing games. So that was kind of like what like spurred me to kind of switch to working at apply at CD Projekt. And so I just had a daughter just during the development at the end of Quantum Break. So she was like 6 months, I think, when we left to go to work in Poland, in Warsaw at CD Projekt. So I took the whole family to Poland. Again, that was the same kind of thing. She was like, who are you talking to? This is my different girlfriend now. Oh, no one. No one.
Yeah, you've been through the practice at that point. You're like, no, Poland's great, great rock scene.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I remember like I for that one, I went to interview by myself. I was just taking videos of all the nice greenery and all the nice stuff, going like, look how great it is. And
life has changed, man. You're sending pictures of the parks now.
Yeah, exactly. I was sending and I was sending the pictures of like the price of beer and like, look how cheap it is and all this kind of stuff. So, and she was like, oh yeah, sounds good. Okay. But I came on board mainly because obviously Cyberpunk was going to go slightly towards a shooter focus, like action gameplay, etc. And they wanted someone who'd kind of done some of that stuff before. And I'd just been working on Crossfire. We'd just done Quantum Break. I worked on the Outsider. So we had a lot of those like open world stuff. So I kind of had some experience in that stuff. It was a interesting project and time, actually, like working with the CD Projekt Red guys.
Did you have an acclimation period of first day Poland, what you went through, or was that completely different from like your experience at Remedy?
I think the biggest difference was just the scale of like everything. Like I said, on Quantum Break, there was like 5 of us designing, including the lead. When I was working on CD Projekt, I think we had like maximum like 14 or 15 gameplay designers. That's just on gameplay design. That doesn't include mission level designs or anything. And I was just like, okay, the scale is just so much bigger, and like trying to figure out like, okay, not managed a team of this size before. How does that kind of work? And how do I kind of navigate that, basically, was one of the things I was trying to do to begin with.
Did you figure out anything that worked particularly well or didn't? Like what was like learning in such a big organization like that?
Well, it just a slightly different setup, at least during the development early stages of Cyberpunk, where like gameplay designers would work by themselves, and then kind of we would then talk to coders and etc. separately. But like at Remedy, it was very much like we would work in like strike teams, or like where like it was very interdisciplinary, where like we'd have gameplay coders, designers, animators, VFX people all working on the same thing. And to begin with, at least, it was a bit more like gameplay designers worked as the gameplay design team, and then coders worked as the coders team, and so it's a bit more like fractured. So I tried to kind of like, as part of like working with those guys, try and find ways to kind of bring like more like interdisciplinary stuff into it. Some of the designers that I worked with at CD Projekt are like some of the most hardworking and amazing designers I ever worked with, basically. Like they're crazy talented. They can do so much with like not a lot.
Nearing kind of the end of your time at CD Projekt, like what was the transition from going from a game like Cyberpunk back into the world of Remedy?
I came out to Remedy, and we were, when I had the first call with them, they were like, "Oh, so we're thinking about doing Alan Wake 2," and I was like, "I'm in. Like, let's go."
It was that fast.
Yeah, it was really because I knew that I was not like I played Alan Wake 1. I thought it was fine, but I knew that like Resident Evil 2 remake had just come out, and I knew that was great, and I was like, "Yeah, I really want to make a game like that." But like, and Alan Wake being like a horror-ish at the time, and we were having that discussion of what could we do with it. Like, I knew that like as far as a horror game would just be very interesting to work on. Again, it's something I'd never done before, so I'm very keen. I don't know if there's a pattern here. I'm like, I work on something, I'm cool. I want to do something else now. So like, I'm kind of like jumping between genres all the time, and so just trying to again, just like it's just absorbing knowledge because with every type of genre you work on, there's different challenges, and you solve things in different ways. Started getting in more into like horror, like A24 had kind of been dropping these banger after banger of horror movies, like
which ones were you watching?
Well, like there's Hereditary by Ari Aster, and then like Midsummer, and then The Witch, and then The Lighthouse by Robert Eggers.
All so good.
Yeah, so like these are all dropping at the same time, and we're like, this is like perfect. Like there's like Resident Evil 2 remake, then there's these banger movies, and then we got Alan Wake. I'm like, we can do something more like combines all of these things. I really wanted to try and work with Sam to kind of figure out how we would do that, like as a studio, and what that would mean.
How influential were you in that decision to like go horror, go survival horror?
I can't remember. I think when I was talking to Sam originally, I think at that point we'd kind of discussed like maybe we should switch the genre. I think that it was a decision that me and Sam made when I got there. We're like, okay, we're going to. I think Sam had an idea, but we hadn't made a call, and I was like, yeah, we should definitely do this because of X, Y, and Z, and I think that this would be really cool and fit the game perfectly.
What was your relationship like with Sam in working on Quantum Break, and then how that changed when you actually had to co-direct coming back on Alan Wake 2?
So on Quantum Break, I didn't really have much interaction with Sam until I became a lead. And then when I became a lead, we would do more playthroughs together. I was also reading a lot of books on like how to construct narrative, just like generally speaking, like in movies or writing a novel. There was a book called Story by Robert something, can't remember what it's called, but I was reading that. And a lot of the stuff that I was reading there, I was taking a lot of the learnings that I was taking from that book and applying them to Quantum Break scenes. And then I was working with Sam, like, I feel like we should change this or we should cut this. Like, so kind of getting more into like that kind of thinking about narrative more. Like,
you felt comfortable enough at that time, just like proposing.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Here's what I'm learning.
I always, no matter what, even if I don't feel like I know, I'm always like
an open book. You're just going to say it.
This is what I feel like we should do. Like, I just like, and this again, this is just a personality thing. Like, I don't have any confidence issues with expressing ideas to people, even if the idea everyone goes like, that's bad. I'm like, cool, well, let's try another one then. I just don't have any shame or like worry about it. It's just something that's kind of like, I've always done it since I've been like young, basically. So yeah, I was talking to Sam and working with Mixu, the game director, on Quantum Break towards the end of shipping. But then, then really, and then I had the call with Sam and he was like really excited to work with me again because I guess we kind of had a good report on Quantum Break. Yeah, and then basically like it felt pretty natural going from that straight into working with him on the
crazy.
Yeah,
I mean, I remember you just saying earlier you showed up and you saw Sam walk by and your whole experience with Max Payne, and then several years later you're shipping story notes to someone that's learning narrative on the fly.
Yeah,
in an elevated position, and then many years later co-directing. Like that's a pretty insane kind of evolution.
Yeah, when I think about it, I'm like, that is crazy. It's like I posted on Twitter recently, or someone posted like, "Oh, Kyle's the luckiest Max Payne fan ever," and went through all of these things. And I was like, I replied going like, "You're right. I am the luckiest Max Payne fan ever." Like in terms of that, it's like all of those things that like from me playing it when I was a kid to going to Remedy to working with Sam to directing with Sam and like being good friends. He's like one of my really good friends now. So feel very lucky and privileged to kind of be in that position.
How did you study like taking a game from a conceptual survival horror, here are some elements that influence the game, to like, let's actually make it the game and let's make it scary and let's make it narrative driven and let's make it that. Like, did you have to look at anything to get inspiration from that? Or like, how did you really,
Well, I took an inspiration from a lot of things. Like I said, we're working on Cyberpunk. This idea that the player is a bit more in control of how they consume the story was something that I really liked. And I really wanted to like do it in another step forward where like, actually, I want the player to be able to decide what stories they consume and how they consume it. Originally, it started out with us having like side missions with a saga, but eventually we were like, oh, maybe we should just have it so that the player can decide which of those two, like saga story or wake story, that they can play. But a lot of that came from me trying to bring more agency to how the player can consume the story based on stuff I'd done on Cyberpunk, basically, or idea of like narrative and gameplay being closer together. Kind of also was like, it was part of us deciding to go survival horror because it's a much slower paced genre. So we could spend more time on the world building and the atmosphere and the exploration of the world. So like to make it feel like the player is consuming the story in the world through their actions rather than kind of like, it's a lot harder in a game where you're kind of moving at 6 meters per second and just running through spaces.
Well, so some of the world I feel like was built up from even the first Alan Wake. I always forget how much of like the environment, the levels, the names of like the cafe. Even it's like there's so many little notes from the first game that when you came onto it as like a, not only just as like a initial player, but as someone that had a role in directing the future of the game, was that hard at all to take like the first kind of iteration and actually build upon that, or was that relatively easy for you to do?
But we knew that we wanted to keep the themes. So, you know, light versus darkness, you know, the first one had fight with light, but we switched it to survive with light. So there's definitely key parts of Wake that we wanted to maintain. You're very narrative driven, like, you know, this slightly meta level storytelling, these themes of like fiction versus reality, those kind of things that are on conceptual level important to the brand we wanted to keep. But then how do we kind of like refocus them into a slightly more horror way and genre of survival horror? So
out of all this, have you came away with the project? By the way, congratulations. The game is amazing. I mean, I think all the awards and kind of like considerations for everything, it wins in my book. Looking at it now and kind of like looking back at the project, I know you're probably in the throes of, you know, the next DLC for the game. Do you have any like core learning from your experience shipping Alan Wake 2? Was there like one thing as a role of a director of like, this is some, you know, crystallized learning from that whole process?
I feel like you can never communicate the direction or like the high level intent of a game enough. Like, but you can also definitely not communicate it enough. So like always err on the side of trying to keep reconfirming the division. For the longest time, we didn't have like things like AMAs like about the game. So we started introducing things like, hey, well, you can post anonymously questions to the leadership team or the creative team, and we will answer them in the next meeting. So we tried to be a bit more like trying to make sure that the team is aligned on the vision of the game. Because I think for the longest time, we knew what we wanted to make, but I don't think everybody in the team kind of knew what the team needed to do to kind of fit what we wanted to make. So definitely focus on communicating ideas and vision as much as you can.
Well, I don't think that's something you had an issue with throughout your entire career.
If
I can be honest, it sounds like your ability to say what you're thinking seems to be a superpower. If anything,
I feel like it's very good going up. Like I'm like, you know, if I mean, like if I'm trying to commute to someone above me saying like, hey, I think we should do this, then it's no problem.
Yeah.
Like, but when you're kind of like when you're kind of trying to communicate down to the team, it's like, it's a slightly different skill set. And when you yourself feel comfortable that you know what you're making, it's easy to forget that maybe everybody else doesn't know as well. Like, you know what I mean? And trying to get that communication pipeline and flow and being fine for people to go like, hey, I don't know what I'm meant to do here, or I don't know what the direction is, or I don't know what you guys want. You can't over communicate enough the vision, and you should just try and do it as much as you can because it helps.
Well, you've had a stellar career. Like I will say, hearing you talk about all of your experience and the breadth of games that you've worked on, some of the things you've gleaned from each and every milestone, from QA to level designer up into more senior designer, into game direction, to working on live service games, to a game like Cyberpunk and then Alan Wake, like that is an insane body of work that you should be incredibly proud of.
I appreciate that. Thank you. It's funny. I the times like flies like this. I'm now like 38. So I've been doing this since I was 18. So it's like 20 years. It just goes by like an instant, and I forget actually like all of this stuff. It's like I don't think about it too often, but talking about it now, it's like, oh yeah, I forgot why we did all that stuff.
Do you still feel like a kid playing Max Payne in your mom's room?
Yeah, I do. Now it's like it's my kid doing the same to me though. So it's the other way around. Yeah.
Well, hopefully you can pass it on. And I mean, it still feels like you have a lot of gas in the tank, and I can't wait to see where your next inspiration comes from, because if history says anything, it seems like you're continuing to level up, and the industry is like also meeting you in ways that you can continue to be creative and push the industry forward.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to the stuff that, I think I'll always have that passion to kind of make games and make creative stuff. So hoping that, keeps going for the foreseeable future.
Is there anyone that you think that is a designer, director, anyone in the games industry that you would love to have a conversation with, or you would recommend that I have a conversation with?
Oh man, like you should definitely talk to Sam.
I would love that.
Yeah. I mean, like, I think that, I would really, really like to sit down with like the Naughty Dog guys, anyone who's really into narrative stuff, like, Kojima, Naughty Dog, Insomniac, those kind of like very narrative studios. Because I think that there's just different ways of making games. And for me, it'd be super interesting to hear like how those guys approach the same kind of things that we do. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing your stories with me. And it's been informative, entertaining, and super enlightening. So I really appreciate the time.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It's been awesome.
Yeah. All right. Great.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.